Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and happy Valentine's Day to you and yours out there in the wild blue yonder. And I do wish those of you who are in relationships a happy, wonderful Valentine's Day. I hope that either today or this weekend you get some time to spend with your partner, with your spouse. I'm excited. I'm actually getting ready to go see Sebastian Maniscalco, who is one of my favorite comedians. And you know what? If you get a little bit of time away from either the kids or you get a little bit of time just to relax with the important individual in your life, it should be under the guise of the great Saint Valentine. So along those heartfelt wishes, the left is not enjoying the best Valentine's Day they've ever had. And that would be for a couple of reasons, one of which, in kind of a broader sense, the Daily Mail reports that liberal women are the least happy and loneliest people in America, according to a new survey by Family Studies showing that just 12% of liberal women in 2024 from the American Family Survey, 12% of liberal women reported being completely satisfied with life ages 18 to 40, whereas moderate individuals were about 28% completely satisfied and conservative about 37%. Then the most likely to feel lonely, liberals were 10% more likely to be lonely than moderates, and then another 8% more likely to be lonely than conservatives. So why would I say this is? Why, if, and again, citing a Pew Research study, why is it that so many individuals on the left are dealing with serious mental issues? People on the left are continuing to gain additional mental illnesses. This is, again, according to a Pew Research study that was reaffirmed from 2020 in 2023 with consistent data. There's all kinds of reasons that we could dig into, but I've got a bit of a hunch, and I'm not talking about Notre Dame. The hunch at play is that if you run around telling individuals, if you run around telling yourself, if all of the media that you consume is centered around you being oppressed, either you being oppressed by racism or being oppressed by homophobia or by misogyny, as an individual who I went to college with, went to the same kind of college and a smaller Christian college in Wisconsin for our undergrad. And after catching up not too long ago, this particular individual has just completely broken down and has gone on angry rants about how Taylor Swift being booed at the Super Bowl is evidence of a deep, terrible, and horrible misogyny that's going on in this country. And if you really do believe that everything in this country is wholly against you because of your innate characteristics, and that, man, everyone's walking around trying to kill the trans and individuals who are gay and who are bi and who are whatever, like the individuals over in Worcester, Massachusetts, in their fantastic freak out that we'll be getting to just a little bit later in the show, then yeah, you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be depressed. And it just might be that instead of affirming someone to digging deeper into that mental instability, digging deeper into the depression, digging deeper into gender dysphoria, just throwing it out there, maybe instead of affirmation, you work on reconciliation. Maybe instead of saying, you know what, everyone is really racist and sexist except me. I'm amazing and fantastic. And so therefore, I'm just alone against the world. Maybe instead, you go touch some grass and get some help for some of these issues instead of leaning further into those. So just a little bit of Valentine's love and life advice. I'm sure that all of you were tuning in explicitly just to get a little of that from yours truly. In other news, because believe it or not, there is far more to news than just the anguish of liberal women in the United States. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has stated that if the United States moves through with its plan to designate Mexican and Central and South American drug and human trafficking cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which they are, then Mexico will expand lawsuits against American gun manufacturers. Okay. There is not a single shred of a decent argument for not classifying an organization responsible for just about every single crime we have a law for, that is responsible for massive amounts of terror and violence, for mass executions in her own country of Estados Unidos de Mexico, that one might pose that, yeah, an organization that traffics children and harmful drugs, not just, a little bit of reefer, not just the local weed, but in this case, extremely harmful fentanyl throughout her country and the United States, yeah, that might be a terror organization. And it does pose questions whenever you suggest that your response to the Secretary of State and the United States State Department, now that it's no longer flush with women's protest voters, which is to say Hamasniks, now that those individuals are no longer running the State Department and the United States via the State Department have officially declared the drug cartels like the Sinaloa cartel to be a terrorist organization, one might pose that that's a good thing. And if your response to this is to suggest that the Mexican government is going to sue gun manufacturers in the United States is some kind of a response, man, I really got to wonder which side that you're on, and really not exactly putting up a lot of great arguments in favor of why Mexico isn't a failed state, because gotta tell you, it's looking pretty failed to the rest of us. The youths are also not handling this well. So a young lady, and many like her, over on the Instagram and TikTok side of the internet have been posting memes saying that they really want Orange Man, as this one girl said, in the suit. He wants to go after the cartel, and I would love for him to FAFO, to mess around and find out. Y'all have no idea how big cartels are, and they do not play like the military. Please, by all means, young people posting these kind of things, do just a shred of research about how the United States military operates when it's serious, when it's not run by like George W. Bush or Barack Obama or Joe Biden. I will remind you that some of the fondest moments of ISIS terrorists have been when their butt flew through their frontal lobes. But anywho, there have, of course, been quite a bit of blowback to the youths that are posting nonsense like a certain young lady did. So she had this comment in response, just the most unhinged of the left coming out to defend the Mexican drug cartels. Here's what this looked like.
I'm going to say this right now. If you put any hotline for ICE on my fucking shit, I'm going to delete you. I'm going to fucking block you. And I'm going to fucking report your account, you dumb fucking shit. Fuck with me. I fucking dare you.
Oh no. My oh my. I certainly could not have seen that coming. She's very, very upset that people started, again, posting ICE stuff because they really don't like her. Trying to throw all of her support behind the cartel. So, fantastic stuff over in that particular field of events. It does get better in the rest of the world as far as international policy is concerned, because Vice President J.D. Vance went over to a NATO conference in Munich preparing for peace talks that are coming between Vladimir Putin's administration in Russia, Zelensky's administration in Ukraine, and then brokered in a deal by the Trump administration to cease hostilities and stop this war. And when Vance went over to speak to NATO, he had two clear messages that he was aiming to get across. Number one, you guys need to put your full weight into your own national defense. Because what I'm hearing is a lot of countries who are talking a really big game and aren't even fielding their own defense. So for example, the Swedish consulate, the consulates from France and from Germany threw a big, massive fit on social media because the Ukraine and Russian wars are the Ukrainian-Russian war is coming to a close. And they're throwing this at, oh, this is terrible that Ukraine isn't getting all of the land that it started with back. And, oh, this is clearly a big... I don't see any Swedish forces on the ground in Ukraine. I don't see hundreds of millions of German dollars or euros flooding into Ukraine. No, those are my tax dollars that are flooding into Ukraine. And so Vance made it quite clear, no, the issue at play, he's not afraid of Russia. He's not afraid of China. It's the wealthy elites over in Europe who are spending their time contributing to NATO? No, by arresting their own citizens in violations of free speech. Here's the Vice President of the United States today.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them.
And he's absolutely correct, because over in Europe, the response to the speech by the Vice President of the United States, well, it gives a pretty good indication to where the priorities of Europeans currently are. And this pretty good indication comes from, for example, a policymaker over in the EU in France, Thierry Breton. She says, with all due respect, I can only imagine that she talks like this, with all due respect, in the European Union, freedom of speech is a core value of our democracy. It is non-negotiable. Never was and never will be. No, people are regularly arrested in the European Union for tweets, for social media posts that, for example, say things like, maybe we shouldn't let unfettered Muslim migrants into the country to wreak havoc and drive through crowds of 20 or 30 people, killing all of those in sight. But, Germany is, just so happens to be the country, by the way, of the European Union that will not even allow individuals to post freely on social media without sending special disclaimers to the rest of the world asking social media sites to take opinions that Germany doesn't like very much down. So spare me with the pearl clutching. And she tries to say, well, the European Union has never canceled elections. Yes, they have. The DSA doesn't regulate content. It ensures transparency so that no platform... It does regulate content. By the way, by saying it ensures transparency is in fact a form of regulation. By requiring social media platforms to post certain things and to take down certain things, that is in and of itself regulatory. So the pearl clutching over in Europe is great, but no one really cares about the Europeans. Here over in the United States, however, the Senate Democrats are furious. Oh, they're just so angry. Pete Hegseth also gave a speech over at NATO and suggested that Ukraine, at the end of this war with Russia, would not be returning, most likely, to its pre-2014 borders, meaning that the Donbass region and the Crimea, which were already heavily pro-Russia, are probably not going to return to Ukrainian territory at the end of this war. That's common sense. The Biden administration said that. The Trump administration understands that. Most of the world understands that. But Senate Democrats don't. Senate Democrats think that we can just like snap our fingers and presto, Russia is going to pull all the way out of Ukraine and, oh, amazing, it's all just going to be roses and wonderful goodness. Maybe if you didn't want that outcome, maybe Biden shouldn't have pulled wholly out of Afghanistan and made the United States and therefore its guarantees on freedom, like the 1990s treaty, which guaranteed Ukrainian independence, looked like a thin piece of paper no one was going to back up. That after leaving Afghanistan to the Taliban and also leaving them hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment, U.S. equipment that I paid for, maybe we should have actually conducted ourselves on the world stage properly. And then Putin wouldn't have marched through, well, he struggled to march through, but done his best to march through the breadbasket of Eastern Europe. So, for example, Senator Roger Wicker, whose hobbies include looking really stupid during Senate confirmation hearings, said, quote, "I don't know who wrote the speech. It's the kind of thing Tucker Carlson could have written, and Carlson is a fool. Everybody knows, and people in the administration know, you don't say before your first meeting what you will agree to and what you won't agree to." So I've listened to the Hegseth speech in its entirety, and he did not state, categorically or uncategorically, that the United States was already going to agree or disagree to certain terms as far as the Russian-Ukrainian peace talks are concerned, but outlining that it's unlikely that Ukraine is going to maintain its 2014 borders is a recognition of something that most of the free world, and most of the unfree world, for that matter, understands. Not exactly banging on half a cylinder here. This is kind of common sense. But again, Senate Democrats are struggling very seriously with that at the present time. And that brings us over to the other bleeding, screeching, whining, yelling, the gnashing of teeth, the renting of sackcloth, perhaps, from the Senate over the Trump administration continuing to reduce the size and the scope of the federal government through DOGE. We're not going to get into the latest round of federal judges that are freezing and unfreezing and pausing and whatnot, because the Trump administration is doing something that is a little near and dear to my heart. The Trump administration has, this is according to several sources, it's not yet confirmed via announcements in the Trump administration itself, although that could obviously change during the show, that the IRS has been directed by the senior Trump administration to lay off thousands of individuals. Now, the Democrat line on this is, oh, wow, just in time for tax returns to be delayed. I seem to remember that all of the big, massive numbers of IRS employees that were being hired were to keep an eye on those $600 transactions like you and me. They were for auditing Americans, not for processing returns. And if the United States had a simple flat tax system, we wouldn't have to worry about all of this goofiness. But of course, if you know, that's a conversation for another time. In short, if you expect the average American, like the individuals watching this show, to weep big crocodile tears for layoffs at the Centers for Disease Control and the Internal Revenue Service, you have got a serious, serious lack of self-awareness. We've got a couple of great interviews for you tonight. I'm really, really looking forward to. The first is with Michael Waller. He is a former guy over with the CIA, working through the last couple of decades of corruption, how the CIA went bad, and then a cool conversation with Ken Cuccinelli, the former Attorney General of Virginia, because we've been talking about illegal immigration and the deportation efforts of Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. But we haven't had the opportunity to ask, what comes next? What are we expecting as Tom Homan and ICE move through several of these raids? What's the next steps? And he's going to go into it in pretty significant detail. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
The Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Great to be joined by former CIA operative J. Michael Waller. Good to have you, sir.
Good to see you.
So I know that there are a lot of different federal actions flying around, and sometimes you got to take a bit of a breath just to step away from the insane news cycle to talk about the deep state, about the colloquially, the individuals inside federal agencies who work against the present administration because they think they know better. Kind of off the bat, can you tell us about your service record and as much as you can about some of the stuff that you saw while you were in?
Sure. Well, actually, it was a very short one. And I was never a CIA employee or an agent or never went through the training or anything. I worked as a volunteer for CIA Director Bill Casey, who was President Reagan's CIA director. And at the time, as now, the CIA had a lack of assets in issues that were important to the president to execute our foreign policy and our defense strategy. So what I ended up doing was I worked in Central America, Nicaragua, El Salvador area to collect intelligence on Soviet arms shipments to communist forces in the region, and then to what Soviet proxy forces were doing in the region. Mm-hmm. And I ended up working as a student journalist, actually out of the Heritage Building, but don't tell anyone.
Yeah, I'll keep that one on the down low.
No, it was a long time ago. To help the Contras, the Nicaraguan guerrilla fighters who were fighting against the communist government in Nicaragua. So I was running a student-led program for that, privately funded. But at the same time, I was doing intelligence collection work for the CIA. Later on, I went to collect intelligence against and to infiltrate and disrupt Soviet front organizations.
So, a million and one things pop into my head immediately, especially after when I was in college. I had the opportunity to do a lot of work with a man of a family at our church from Nicaragua, and he used to tell me tales about the kind of the middle of the Cold War there. And we might get to that later, and kind of how China's doing stuff with Silk Road now, and kind of subversive communists trying to buy up other parts of the world. But instead, I noticed that you mentioned the CIA, even during Reagan's time, had a series of objectives internally that were different from those of the president. Could you maybe explain what you mean?
Sure. And this is actually a problem that went all the way back to Eisenhower, right after the CIA was first founded. I mean, Truman set it up, but even he was leery of it and the powers it could have against the American constitutional system. Eisenhower, same thing. Here he is, four-star general who won World War II for us in Europe. And even he, as president, was concerned that the organization he was building with people whom he trusted would one day come back and subvert the very constitutional republic that we have. So this has always been a problem. But for the first decades of its existence, up until 1976, there was no congressional oversight of the CIA at all. And there
just operated in its own, I wouldn't say bubble, because it wasn't separated from everyone else and no one was really separate from it, but there wasn't any oversight of it. The bubble joke was more that the CIA was definitely still operating from inside to without the bubble.
Sure. And it was responsive to the presidents who were in office at the time. But you still, it's a human nature thing. Anytime we're going to be given lots of money and lots of authority to do whatever we want, something's going to go bad somewhere, no matter what our motivations are. And that's what happened with the CIA and so many of these other agencies. They did a lot of great work. They made a lot of mistakes like anybody did, but they were fundamentally an instrument of the president to wage covert warfare in this gray subversive space against the Soviets and against others, but also to collect intelligence secretly, things that we weren't supposed to know, to inform the president to allow him to make the best decisions that he possibly could. But when you don't have any checks and balances at all, then this entity becomes a state within a state, as the CIA had become and as it has really become again.
So what are some of the ways that the motives of the presidents began, maybe not the motives, the goals of the presidents would be subverted by the Central Intelligence Agency?
Well, sometimes presidents don't really want to know what's going on because they don't themselves want to have accountability. or at least
Okay.
public accountability. So they'll kind of look the other way and just let the CIA do its stuff as long as it's moving in the right direction. So a lot of presidents didn't want to know. President Kennedy thought the CIA was out of control or getting out of control and wanted to rein it in a bit.
Did he have some examples that were at the top of his mind? So this is usually where I start hearing that Kennedy wanted to, bring things in. And I reach back to my, my West Point military history and agency history courses, and I'm not quite drawing on what were some of the examples that Kennedy had maybe at the forefront that he thought it was a little out of control.
Well, first, as soon as he came in as president, there was a covert operation going on that Eisenhower had started,
Mhm.
which was to build up a guerrilla army of Cuban exiles to go back into Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro, whose regime was only barely a couple of years old.
Right, infantile.
And so Kennedy inherited this program, and of course, it just blew completely to pieces. He
Yeah,
couldn't.
because rebel Cuban armies don't have an air force.
They don't have an air force. They don't have offshore naval support. And
It's really hard to make the U.S. Air Force look like a rebel military air force as well.
Yeah.
Our planes are just a little bit better than one might expect.
Yeah. Well, they had done a good job in Guatemala in 1954 with that Guatemalan Air Force that was built up. That was done really well, and they were trying to replicate something like that for Cuba, but it didn't happen. Anyway, what it did was it beat up Kennedy really, really badly in the first months of his presidency. So he became very leery of the CIA and the power it had, because when he was a senator, there was no Senate oversight of this. People didn't talk about it.
Right, because it was a basic executive branch that was functioning in a military capacity that you do need the president's ability to have covert measures against a foreign foe, at least theoretically. I mean, that's why our USAID was originally supposed to function.
Well, and that's why he started U.S. Agency for International Development. It was right after the Bay of Pigs. He gave speeches right after the whole collapse of that operation. A lot of people got killed and imprisoned, Cubans.
Right.
The president himself was really damaged in the first months of his administration. Later on that year, he formally established the U.S. Agency for International Development and he wrote it in his executive order, as an agency under the Secretary of State, meaning it's an instrument of U.S. power in this gray area to work abroad, not as a charity, but as an instrument of American soft power.
Right. It's supposed to be a subversive organization that I know we don't really, like the term, because it obviously it's not a good thing in and of itself, but bribery, right? To bribe a country to work with us instead of the communists.
Well, there were other ways to bribe them or coerce them, but USAID was really to have a big visibility for American, the goodness of American society and the American way of life in the areas where the communists were working among the poor people in the cities and in the countrysides to foment revolution.
So like a really soft, individualized Marshall Plan with like a really great PR move, or?
Yeah, it was, because the purpose of the Marshall Plan, exactly, it was to rebuild Europe at a time when Stalin had his own plans on what to do with Europe. So this was
whatever we do, don't let Austria fall into the Soviets' camp. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So the Marshall Plan, and it really worked where it was implemented. But then that was under Truman and Eisenhower. When Kennedy comes in, Eisenhower had a whole small group of different foreign aid programs, Food for Peace and other programs like that. And that was to show it was to discredit the whole Soviet narrative of the American imperialists trying to oppress the poor. So here were the Americans trying to help the poor in a high visibility way, but it was all under presidential control through the Secretary of State. That's the way it was envisioned. And it worked in tandem with the U.S. military in places like where you have now this mission creep in Vietnam and Laos and other parts of the world.
So that you didn't have to, in a really terrible situation, have the game of telephone that takes 3.5 days between communicating between the State Department and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the military.
Right, because USAID was running out of every embassy we had.
Right, exactly. We don't exactly have USAID buildings, out of, 15 blocks over on the other side of a city from the embassy. It doesn't exactly work.
Right, although it is 2 blocks from the White House.
Well, anyway, moving on. So I guess that brings me a little bit forward to, we get to Kennedy. He has a lot of things that he doesn't like about the organization. It's gotten way out of hand. It's left, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, according to Kennedy, has left its original scope. He wants to rein it in. How do we get from there to a more largesse form of subversion.
Well, if you look at Kennedy's speeches from when he was a senator, his entire career in the Senate, almost every speech contained a warning about subversion. He's the only politician I've seen of stature who was warning about this at the time during the Cold War. So people look at Joe McCarthy and communist subversion of our own institutions, and one is challenged to show where Joe McCarthy was fundamentally wrong. He was just trashed for, like today with Doge, he's being trashed for exposing corruption and treason and espionage.
Right, for the gall to read receipts. And just by the way, as a small aside here, my expertise in kind of policy history really kicks in as far as education curriculum and how it changed during the Cold War. And one of the papers that I had the pleasure of working on a team when I was in my graduate program was how after the Bay of Pigs and after the U.S. failure of development and the Soviet realizing that U.S. aid was becoming an effective tool at bribing them, they launched their anti-colonialism narrative that ended up finding its way into American education, where we apologized then for, our colonialism was so evil. And it's really interesting to hear you describe this, because in education policy, we talk about as soon as the hunt for the hunt for communism ended, things got really weird really quickly. As soon as there's no one crying wolf, wolves might move in. So it's just as an aside, not even as a question. I apologize. I don't mean to derail you, but that's fascinating to me to hear the other sides of U.S. agencies changing things at this time. So Kennedy was.
So Kennedy was trying to specifically creating USAID to fight communist subversion worldwide. It was not a do-gooder program.
No.
Charity comes from volunteerism. It doesn't come from coercively collected taxes.
Well, yeah, people forget that the UN relief agencies originally, we use food as bribery, no, we won't apologize. I mean, that was derived, in part from seeing 20th century regimes utilize soft power, as you framed it.
So if you can get huge grain commodities, from American farmers and have the federal government purchase them from the farmers, not as a subsidy per se, but as an instrument of soft power to bring those to other countries, to empower the leaders of those other countries, who you want, and then to incentivize others to come about your way, whether it's through bribery or simply common sense incentives. That's a really great soft instrument. And the fact that some of that aid was sold, that was kind of the purpose of some of the aid, so it could be sold on local markets, so you have a capitalist economy developing, but also so that foreign leaders will know, hey, it's to our benefit to be friends with the United States.
Yeah, here a taste of things to come, kind of a situation. What, the CIA got jealous, or I know that's very elementary, but like the CIA got extra subversive after seeing this. What's the catalyst for the CIA kicking things into subversion overdrive?
Oh, the CIA was always subversive. It was designed to be. It's necessary. It's like you have the Air Force was designed to drop atomic bombs.
Well, sure, but I mean, reflexively subversive, I should say. So internally subversive, maybe.
Oh, okay. So
the catalyst for internal subversion.
Power is it can be a positive thing. Waging it internally against a president or against our constitutional system of government, that's very different. That's where it becomes a criminal organization or a state within a state. Now, some people have theories about CIA and Kennedy, which I don't buy, but I'm
right. No, I think I'm
waiting to see the declassification of the entire assassination archive.
That's exactly what I was going to level on, and so certainly some of the bits I do remember from agency, and you'll forgive me for being a plebe interested in other things at the time than the lectures that were going on. I regret that now, but I never really saw the trail of breadcrumbs leading in that direction. So where my brain does start to have an itch that needs scratching is, when did we reach a point that the agency completely jumped the shark into internal subversion as a staple part of the diet per se, as opposed to maybe more of a rarity or maybe not as severe in the beginning?
Well, it started in the 50s unintentionally this way. I mean, it was with President Eisenhower's approval, which was to use journalists to wage the Cold War. And this meant train them, recruit some of them, but feed others of them to help them with scoops, to help them build names for themselves, to help them advance and then bring others along like them. And that was
So was
that
it
was in the 50s.
was it really a Hoover Dam situation with Operation Mockingbird where the CIA just said, "Whoa, that worked really, really well"? I'm the Hoover Dam example. I'm sorry, where they finished the Hoover Dam and it's like, wow, we just did this. This is the most incredible feat of engineering and dam building that we've seen since whatever. So Operation Mockingbird worked so well that we're like, whoa, I have these new superpowers kind of a situation.
Well, we don't know because not everything's declassified.
Not everything's declassified.
But if you look at who are the favored CIA outlets, you see who leaks to whom. So if intelligence sources say, right, okay, that's covering up. That's a journalist covering up and protecting his sources.
Right.
But the best leaks in terms of revelations come through the Washington Post, through the New York Times, through the Atlantic, through Rolling Stone, through Mother Jones, and so forth. So you see this establishment liberal media and some of the alternative media that has become part of the establishment. Those are the favored places for the CIA to leak. So what the CIA is doing in these cases, or people in the CIA routinely, first, they're trying to shape American public opinion and influence Congress through leaking classified information. That's illegal. Secondly, they are providing classified information to those who are not legally able to receive it. That's a felony every single time.
I guess I never thought of it in that way because the president is one of the only individuals that has the ability to declassify certain kinds of classified documents. CIA agent 125 doesn't have the authority to give me, investigative columnist over at the Daily Signal, access to sensitive documents or the identifying meat thereof inside the document.
Sure.
Like they can't just give me the findings.
No, they can. That's a felony. The material has to be declassified through a process of review to make sure that our sources are protected, the people abroad who are helping us, that our methods are protected. Have we infiltrated Prime Minister so-and-so's cabinet? Do we have somebody else's, President so-and-so's phone tapped in a different country? All of those things have to be protected. Otherwise, our adversaries will build countermeasures and we'll even get some of the people who are helping us killed.
Right.
So these leaks are very serious. So you have decades now of CIA personnel, meaning they've been run through their entire careers over the generations of several careers, illegally, routinely committing felonies to get their point across.
That's
against any authorization of the president.
And that would be a reasonable, and I'm going to be drawing just complete conjecture at this point to bring this one home. One of the reasons that many were not as shocked to see the 51 intelligence agents try to suggest that the Hunter Biden story was Russian disinformation, by the time that so many felonies had been committed in perhaps this certain way that it is not necessarily a logical jump whatsoever to say, oh, well, then these 51 intelligence individuals would commit this additional sin because they were already so used to committing these kinds of felonies.
It's routine. They don't even view it as felony.
Routine. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
It's just part of the game. And the thing is, those 51, most of them weren't even intelligence officers. A lot of them were Pentagon people or in other parts of the national security community, military officers. They knew nothing about Russian disinformation. They had no professional training in it. Some of them were intelligence operatives, so they weren't analysts who would be professionally capable of analyzing whatever information. And if they were analysts, shame on them because they really screwed up badly if they were indeed screwing up. So, we could tell then at the time, but we ultimately knew for a fact that this was a manufactured product and that few individuals inside the system, Mike Morell at CIA and Tony Blinken, who was then on the Biden campaign, now then Secretary of State, they engineered this and they just emailed and called their friends and said, hey, we wrote this letter, would you sign it? But if you read the letter carefully, it doesn't say that this is Russian disinformation. It says the Hunter Biden laptop story bears all the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation.
Oh, that's such baloney.
And they weasel worded it, but then they got Politico, which was getting funding from where?
Right.
to write that headline saying flat out that it was Russian.
Well, hey, I mean, what journalistic outlet doesn't have $500 pro subscriptions for individual users? Come on. Well, you're saying that's not above board?
Signal doesn't have its own pro subscription rate for.
I know, right? I know it's incredible. Believe it or not, there is a secret measure where if you buy a subscription to my show before midnight, then you'll actually get the episodes sooner than if you'd ordered them later.
Oh.
So I know. Pass on the government contracts. That's
so Politico. So they arrange with Politico to have a misleading title. And you can say, well, that's Politico's fault. But not one of those 51 came out and said, whoa, the title's misleading. We didn't say that.
right.
In fact, they didn't come out. The first one to come out publicly to criticize it was James Clapper. He was Obama's director of national intelligence. He said it. And then John Brennan, the CIA director, said it, a couple of years later, meaning after the damage had been done. It was only designed as a prop for Biden 3 days before his debate with Trump to say, see, I've got the whole national security community saying that the stories about my son are Russian lies.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to have you back again. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. I think that we're going to do something maybe a bit different than we traditionally do, at least for this particular time in the show. We're going to go ahead and switch it over to just a bit of mail time. So, without further ado, let's dig into some of that good old mailbag that's been coming in over the last week. Some great questions, some terrible questions. We will get that other interview over with our dear friend, the former Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, up here in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, there are some great questions that have come in. You can find the way to send those over to us one of two ways. Either way number one, you can head over to TonyKinnett.com. There's a little contact button. You can sling that right over. Or number two, you can throw a Hail Mary pass of hoping that producer Daniel just sees your question out there in the ether. Now, why do a mail time segment? Well, I'll tell you why. Because every show has to have some type of way to hear from the viewers. And I just don't trust any one of you to call in live on the air. The very thought is terrifying of what it is that you could say, and then FCC could find me for airing a little bit later. So, going through some of the questions, the serious and the not serious at all. From Betsy. Why don't you like Vivek Ramaswamy? I like a lot of what Vivek has to say as far as where the United States should be culturally. I really do like Vivek's commitment to meritocracy. I think those things are good, but he comes across as a used car salesman. I just don't buy it. I have not really seen Vivek be consistent on policy for more than like a year, on what he believes, depending on what it is that he believes, for more than a couple of years. It really just appears that he says kind of what the edgy but good thing is to say, and he's just like way better at saying that than like Matt Gaetz, for example. Vivek, I just don't, there's something just about the way that he says what he says, the way that he communicates it, the way that he doubles down on the emotionalism of the point rather than what the point is about. It's not that I don't like Vivek at all. I just don't really see him as a leader. I see him more as just an amplifier. And for what he was running for, I don't know. I just, that kind of hops in with that in me. So that's just kind of my take. I think it just kind of comes across as untrustworthy. From Freddie, why do you take off your glasses? So the comment section on the live stream, for those who listen to the podcast later, or who listen on the air in one of our syndicated radio station partners, you probably have very little idea what I'm talking about other than the live stream over on YouTube at Daily Signal. They have noticed that when I start to get really into a point, and we're talking about something, usually someone acting exceptionally stupid, I might take off my glasses out of an act of emotion, gesture with it. Why do I do that? Well, because I like to have something when I'm really focused, just to kind of, I don't know, mess around with, whether it's glasses, whether it's a pen. When I was a teacher, I used to have a dry erase marker all the time that I would walk around the room when I was teaching and just constantly flip up in the air all the time. And it really bothered my students for like the first week because it was distracting. This is just kind of an off jam of that. And also, I don't know, it's kind of a bit. You know, take the glasses off. It's a little extra expressive because you're on camera. And, you know, as far as theater and acting goes, it's a lot better than, you know, having pronouns and being a barista. So that's kind of the whole take behind it. It's just my way of being slightly more dramatic than is necessary, usually with the intent of mocking an individual, mostly just channeling my old internal teacher, of where the teacher would come in after, you know, your class was really bad for the substitute teacher. They would walk in and they would sit on the corner of the desk. Every teacher does this. They actually teach us that in teacher college. It's one of the 3 things they actually teach you when you're not wasting money on an education degree. And then they say, never in my 27 years of teaching, doesn't matter if you've been teaching for like 2 months or for like 57 years, it's always 27 years. Never in my 20 some years of teaching have I had a class act so terrible. That's what the glasses thing is. I don't know, just kind of how that rolls off the tongue. All right, a serious question from Mark. Tony, do you think someone in President Trump's administration or the president himself should address the blatant anti-white racism that is currently coming from many black politicians on the left? I believe it should be called out. Thanks. How do you treat individuals like Ilhan Omar and Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's not black, but, you know, Hispanic? But how do you treat a lot of congressmen, congresswomen, of all different shades, sizes, and colors who go on these weird racist tangents, like Summer Lee and her reparations, whatever? To the chagrin of family members close to me, call Jasmine Crockett the crackhead of Congress. Because when I would get up to go teach, and, you know, you'd be up at about, 6, 7 in the morning on your way to work, you go to a gas station in Indiana, it's a speedway oftentimes, and you occasionally will walk by that person sitting next to the door who's on things, and they say really crazy things to you. Like, you're walking up to the door and they're like, "Hey man, did you see that fish fighting a beaver in the alley?" And you just, the best thing to do in that particular moment is either to greet them by their name as they walk by, if that's just a speedway that you've gone to every morning for the last couple of years, or ignore them completely and just walk into the speedway. That is how you treat a crackhead sitting outside your local gas station. I believe that the Trump administration is doing itself every favor in the world by simply allowing those in the Democratic House caucus to continue acting exactly like they are. Summer Lee wants to get up and yell about how everybody's white and bad and evil and they need reparations for some reason. Let her. Ilhan Omar wants to get up and talk about how illegal immigration is, bad, while she may or may not have committed immigration fraud by possibly marrying her brother to get him in the country. Let her talk all she wants. The more air and the more oxygen that those individuals are given, the better it's going to be for the rest of the country, because stupid people sound, you guessed it, stupid. So, stupid people, allow them to act just like complete idiots. By all means, I say give Jasmine Crockett 2 microphones at any given time. Just let her give her whole soliloquy. Just get her on out there in front of the public. Don't stop her. Don't even need to address it. She's doing that herself. She's not giving herself any credit. She ain't convincing anybody. This next question is from Jen. She says, is the left going to pull itself together before the next election? What would that even look like? Love the show. Thank you. First of all, I appreciate you saying that. Thanks. I appreciate you tuning in. Do I think the left is going to pull itself together before the next election? No. There was a small window of opportunity before the DNC elections, in which there was John Fetterman being moderately reasonable, again, still not at all a good policymaker. Very much on the left. But, like, not insane on running out and saying it's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. They didn't go that direction. In fact, I had an episode where I said they're either going to go in the direction of John Fetterman or they're going to go in the direction of David Hogg. And now David Hogg is the vice chair of the DNC and all of his patent insanity. So they're going to go loopy Looney Tunes just for the foreseeable future. And Exhibit C for this particular case, Your Honor, is that they gave a lot of their party's power away, as in the actual rules of the DNC, all of these networks with their equity rules. They got in front of the country and they said, hey, those people that are suffering from gender dysphoria, who believe that they're actually something else, or some kind of dysphoria or dysmorphia, they actually believe they're an animal. This guy believes he's a pregnant woman. This person believes there's some kind of weird alligator cat creature or something, the weird stuff. Instead of getting those people mental help and not giving them leadership positions because, they're not healthy, the Democrats said, these are our people and they should be given the microphone. So that's why in Worcester, Massachusetts, a town I have been in and enjoyed, has, by the way, one of the best organ, not organ donor, but like piano organ shops I've ever been in. Really great. I wonder if that guy is still open. Worcester's not a terrible place, but its local politics are horrible. It's right outside of Boston. So it's right outside of Boston. I mean, not exactly a red area of the country. A group of individuals screaming at the local council, again, a blue city council. And it's not like this is a group of trans people that drove out to Oklahoma City and started yelling at people. This is right outside of Boston, Worcester, Massachusetts. Started screaming about how everything was over and that being trans, they needed protection from Trump. Again, for those who are listening to the radio or the podcast, I implore you, please go to the live stream of the show. Go to YouTube. We've got a playlist of all of the shows lined up. The way that these individuals are dressed speaks volumes, I must say, in this particular point in time. So I give you the transgender protesters at the Worcester, Massachusetts City Council meeting.
I need the city to protect me because the federal government won't. And if you think you're afraid of Trump, you should see how afraid of Trump I am.
Okay, that is a woman who is dressed in a blue clown wig. And I checked this, by the way. This is a person who thinks that she is a mime or a clown. Really. Like her identity, her actual, I think I'm a man, or I think I'm a woman, or I think I'm a cat. She thinks that she's I don't know, she's got the white mime gloves on. She's got big fake pearls on. She's got some kind of weird eyebrow treatment that looks like someone stapled two worms above. Those are stenciled on. And then she has paling makeup, like white paling clown makeup on. And then the blue clown wig. She's like, I'm afraid of Trump. Why? Is it because he's going to bankrupt Barnum and Bailey's? I'm not quite sure, but anyhow.
Can you wrap up, please?
Yes, I can. If you say that you're afraid of Trump and that's why you don't want the city to be a safe space for trans people.
Here is a young man who thinks he's a woman, who screams lots of fun, colorful words and is literally shaking. Very, very mentally healthy individual. The left is doing great.
Am I taking too long pleading for my life?
You remembered how many children I have and that 2 of them are trans.
I speak as both the B and the T in the LGBT.
I'm really proud of the bacon and the tomato showing up over on the sandwich. And as a Hoosier, I'm just going to point out BLTs are the most underrated sandwich of all time. We'll move through here just a little bit. The glitter beard. The glitter beard is truly spectacular. There is a woman who got her hair cut like if the Backstreet Boys and Ellen DeGeneres had a child. which given Ellen DeGeneres' proclivities, probably not possible. Wore a suit that looks like it's from JCPenney's. JCPenney's not a bad place to get a suit if there's any still open. And then stenciled on, or I sure hope that's stenciled on, a reddish orange beard and some kind of really botched like shadowing and foundation job. And she keeps scratching at the fake beard. And I was confused. I'm like, why are you scratching at the fake beard? I don't quite understand what the point is in this particular situation. Oh, it's because she puts glitter in the beard.
Day off. I do not want to be in your DMs. I do not want to be in your email inboxes. I do not want my creativity writing diss tracks like Kendrick. I don't want to spend an hour applying glitter on my face so that you will hear and see me.
I'm going to be honest with you. If you show up with hair and glitter and then you start flicking the hair and the glitter like dandruff, I don't want to hear or see you. Nobody wants to hear or see you. Get that checked out. If someone comes into your office or someone comes up to your place of work and they just say, hey man, you seen the glitter in my beard? And it's like, dude, you need like a psychiatrist and then some Head and Shoulders. Quit rubbing those flakes all over the desk. I had to cut out a few of them. I actually had to cut out most of the individual threatening the council members, screaming, look at me. He's like Batman, but he's wearing like a teenage girl's like brown leather jacket, like, swear to me. The left gave them positions of prominence in the party. Once you give someone a seat, so great example on the other side of the party in a lesser way, okay? Just have a conversation. I know that people in the comments disagree about this a lot. Let's talk about someone that acts kind of loopy that the right gave a seat to, and now is kind of awkward and you had to claw that back. So for example, Kanye West for a hot minute was given like a position of like decency, like he sat down and he had dinner with Trump, and a lot of people were like, I don't know, he's kind of mentally insane. And then Kanye was like, oh yeah, but I'm a Christian now, and a lot of us said, that's all. If that's true, that's wonderful. It's fantastic. If that's true, welcome to the family. Let's wait a second though before we give him. And then just cuckoo, just insane nonsense started spewing forth. And then you have to claw it back, because once you've associated yourself with an individual, it's very hard to distance yourself from those individuals. My argument to maybe a not crazy thing, but from like a really bad policy and a bad politician standpoint, would be Kari Lake in Arizona. Kari Lake, not a good candidate. But once she was out there, you can't just like suddenly say, we disavow Kari Lake, we don't want anything to do with it. No, she's part of the party. Like, she's here. And she's going to do what she does until she's done. And that's actually why I think that, at least as far as Donald Trump is concerned, I'm really glad that he made her some kind of ambassador so that we can take a break and not hopefully lose the next midterm. So as far as those particular things, I just making sure there is one last question that I'm not entirely sure if it is a real question or a joke, but we're going to go for it anyway. This is from Fishin' Homie LOD. And he says, is the show live or is it Memorex? Because I guess there was a bit of confusion. The last interview that we did was I was in a tan blazer and now I'm in a blue blazer. And I don't know how you guys are about the whole whether the dress is gold and white or blue and black thing, but those are different colors. I'm going to level with you. Sometimes the show is live. Right now it's live. Right now it is 8 minutes and 50 seconds Eastern time after the live stream delay, and it goes out to you in the various ways. It'll be about that time. Sometimes it's not live. For example, we actually recorded that interview with Michael earlier this week, and it was awesome. I didn't want to cut it down, so we waited until a night that I wasn't handcuffed to the FCC clock to show it to you in its entirety. Some interviews are live. Usually if you see me wearing the same thing, it's live. I don't have a wardrobe team. I really appreciate you think I dress well enough to have a wardrobe team. I probably need one for that matter. But I know I probably could try to remember, oh, I wore this outfit on the day that I'm airing this, so I need to go change into that. I don't usually keep track of it that well. So as far as absolutely the dumbest questions are in fact being answered. I answer the best questions and I answer the dumbest questions because it's fun. I don't know. There's just something about, cackling over someone scratching their glitter dandruff beard that, really resonates with the American people, and why, oh dear God, thank the Lord, Kamala Harris is not the president of the United States, and we're not inviting guys with big fake breasts to take their tops off on the White House lawn. That would be why see, sometimes, I want to say something very, very unpopular here, sometimes bullying is okay. Sometimes like a culture deciding that some behavior is unacceptable, that's a good thing. Like, we used to have things that we kept to ourselves. There's a Newsweek article that I absolutely love, and it's titled, "We Should All Know Less About Each Other." If you show up to an important event telling me that you identify as a clown, and then you somehow incorporate circus terms into how you describe your genitalia, yes, that's a thing. That is a thing. Mixing the words for genitalia with like circus terms. If you don't think that's a mental crisis going on right there in front of you, well then at least I hope that you're getting commission off of whatever that performance is. Yeah, that should be 150% collectively mocked by the entire culture. So that all said, you know what, just for kicks and giggles, I know I did say yesterday that it was a 4-day weekend. Sometimes I just can't help getting on the air and doing the show with you guys. So that said, we're going to head over to Ken Cuccinelli, who I sure hope is still waiting on the line for us. I think we should be good to go. We're going to talk a little bit about what's coming next with Immigration Customs Enforcement. Because right now there are deportations that are happening. There are raids that are in the process of being sealed from moles and are taking place on violent criminals, but the American people are expecting a larger operation. So what comes next? Trump's opened Guantanamo Bay. The Ecuadorian government has suggested the use of some Ecuadorian prisons to house violent arrested in America illegal immigrants in those particular places. So we're going to talk about that from one of the guys who is part of that elite class of Border Czar. And no, I'm not talking about Kamala Harris. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. It's a pleasure to be joined again by the great Ken Cuccinelli, former Virginia Attorney General and former deputy acting secretary of the DHS, right?
I acted like a deputy secretary. That's right.
Right. So there's deputy, there's assistants, then there's acting, and there's so many different ways to mix those all together.
Yeah, my official title was senior official performing the duties of the deputy secretary. So the acronym was SOPTDUS.
But he's one of the great border czars. And so we brought him on to talk about some of the questions that are not yet being asked by so many regarding immigration policy. And I'm just going to throw it right to you, which is, we've started rounding up a lot of the most violent illegal immigrants in the country. What comes next?
So if you look hard at the numbers, about half the people they're picking up are criminal illegal aliens, by which we mean they committed another crime inside the United States. And there's only about 500,000 of those. And if you figure there's 10 to 20 million, probably 20 million's a good number, illegals here, that is a very small proportion. It's 2.5% of the total. And yet they're half of who's being picked up. Now, there's good reasons for that. There's a reason they're prioritized, because they present additional threats to the communities they live in and this country. And so there's good reasons to prioritize them. But no one should think that's all we're picking up and deporting. We have another 1.5 million people here who already have deportation orders that they're ignoring. Those folks are being picked up as well. So that's about 2 million, a little less than 2 million total out of the 20 million or so illegals here, 10 million of whom came under Joe Biden. So there's a lot more work to do. And if you think about just removing 1 million people a year, that's about 50 completely full passenger jets every day flying home. That is a lot of logistics.
Yeah, it is.
That is a lot of logistics. Part of the reason to pick up criminal aliens and everyone who's illegal with them is because they're easier to find because they've committed a crime. If you think of all the places in this process, you can have bottlenecks. The very first one is, well, where is this person? Every single one is effectively a fugitive from justice. And so you have to find them and then go pick them up, and you have to do it safely, not ever fully knowing all the circumstances, which makes me happy to see the FBI and DEA in on this. They're doing something useful here. And so forget the moral culpability and the public safety. Because these people pop up on our radar when they commit crimes, they're easier to find. So those folks give us an advantage getting past the first bottleneck, finding them. And which is also why anyone, for instance, let's say you go to their house at 3 a.m.
Gotcha.
Well, anybody else in the house who's here illegally, you should start the deportation process for, right? Now, people should know another logistical challenge is for the folks that the Biden administration didn't give court dates to. This is literally the first time you've given them a court date. Now, that brings us to the next logistical challenge. And you're right, you can tell this stuff hasn't been talked about, right? Is the limits on ICE detention. If you're going to pick up, hold, organize people for 50 jumbo jet flights a day home, now some will just go back across the Mexican border, people from Mexico. And if we're using Gitmo, if we're going to return Cubans, we should just push them through the gate. But other than that, you're probably putting people on planes.
Right.
And you have to have the Department of State arrange for that plane to be able to land, each one of them. We already saw that conflict with Colombia. President solved that very fast. And I have to tell you, that wasn't happening in the first administration. First of all, no Secretary of State, none, not even Mike Pompeo, even talked about immigration in the Western Hemisphere. Not in those countries, much less actually imposing penalties. The penalties that were imposed by the State Department on countries who wouldn't take their deportables back in the first Trump administration, they were so pathetically low. You wouldn't believe me if I said it. It was like the children of party officials from a province in the country can't come to the United States. Oh, hurt me. It was as nothing as it could be. And that is the long history of the State Department under presidents of both parties. The State Department doesn't want to help this. They don't want to make it tough, et cetera. So that's next logistical hurdle. But let's go back to the one I talked through.
Yeah, we've already got so many hurdles and things
like
this.
Yeah. You and I talked beforehand. Good generals, no tactics. Great generals, no logistics. And when they hit the logistical wall is where the folks, the leadership that President Trump is hiring are really going to be tested in terms of their ability to juggle all of these pieces while being sued every day, and still keep these folks moving out of the country.
So if we're going to tackle this kind of the stuff, we're going to move into this area of hitting the wall, even if you have a great response strategy to the logistical hurdle, even if you have things set up, they're in place, it's still going to be a slight delay in momentum. And right now, the Trump administration is experiencing one of the greatest feats of political and I'd even say international momentum that I've ever seen in the first month of an administration. And I'm not just talking about the ones I've lived through. I mean, I've looked back, I think maybe the McKinley, possibly, but maybe TR's second. But other than those, I've never seen this kind of momentum. When we do hit that logistical bump, it is, no matter what, it is going to be a slight stall, even with the best of, like you talked about.
That's right. And you've got to absorb those punches and keep going.
Well,
and you've got to anticipate them and prepare for them as best you can. I'll give you an example. We already know we have a limit on ICE detention beds.
Right.
Congress has to help with that. Well, Gitmo is 30,000 more beds. So there's a workaround. Now, it's logistic. You introduce new logistical challenge in using Gitmo. You got to get people there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're tying up some of those flights every day,
right?
And you're not actually taking people home. You're just moving them to a different holding facility. The one I really like is President Bukele of El Salvador offering to take folks in their prisons.
Mm-hmm.
They've just built some new prisons. If they would, for example, clear a prison just for our detention use, we can pay them more than it costs them to house those folks. They can make a profit on us, and we will save money relative to U.S. detention.
Not to mention the logistical challenge of getting individuals out of the country, and then at the very least, it being outside of a place where we have to worry about keeping those individuals right next to civilian populations or civilian transportation hubs.
Well, and from there, frankly, a lot of people who now know they're going to be held and they know they have BS claims, they know they're going to lose on those claims. Once they believe they'll be held until those claims are heard and they know they're going to lose on those claims, they'll volunteer to go home. They will volunteer to go home, and we'll end up cycling people through those El Salvadoran prisons. And the deterrent effect of knowing you're not going to be held by ICE, you're going to be held in El Salvador, and that's going to be a major deterrent to a lot of.
That's a different kind of prison right there.
Yep. Yeah, and we have to be careful about that. As much as we might laugh about sticking them in with a bunch of MS-13 people, we really have to arrange not to do that because, again, remember all the things that are coming at you at once. We set ourselves up for a lawsuit in that situation that is going to be a lot harder to win than simply making an arrangement with El Salvador to house prisoners.
And that's why I like the idea of an exclusive prison building or complex,
or at least a wing of a prison, et cetera.
Right. Again, one of the ideas of the original post RICO lawsuits after its first initialization was, well, you don't want to put all these guys in the same prison to have them plot their way out and then back. They come back into society and then presto, day 2, they're executing all of these, specific plans. But I just want to hit you with this last question. Do you believe from where you're at, and because I know that not only were you working with Homeland Security because you understand the legal framework, you understand the challenges, you've got a mind for analysis, and you can't escape that charge. I know you're good at seeing things at 30,000 feet. Do you see the Trump administration this time around making preparations kind of behind the scenes for this logistical pause?
Yeah, I won't call it a pause. I'll call it the challenges, the word you used before.
Sorry, just the hitting the wall. I mean, again, it's no matter what administration, a moment when you find far more illegals ready to deport than you might have been expecting. That might happen in a raid.
Yes, and they're ready for those kind of one-day bumps. But what's more challenging is building the capacity to get to this million people a year, 2 million people a year. If the president wants to deport everybody that came in under Joe Biden, plus the criminals and the people with deportation orders, that's really about 2+ million people a year. And so you're talking about 100 jumbo jet flights. Now, part of what you want to happen here is you want to make the reasons they came untenable. So you're going to start cranking down on those work permits literally as much as the law allows you to crank down on them. And by the way, through regulatory power, the scope of those is very much within the power of the executive branch. So they
it's
can
kind of one of the
crack down
things
on
the
that.
Department of Labor is supposed to be for, isn't it?
Well, the work permits come from USCIS, the agency I led before I became the deputy secretary.
Right, but hiring people under undue practices is supposed to be the
Yes, Department of Labor is supposed to participate in that. Frankly, it's a very convoluted dotted line.
U.S. agencies convoluted? No.
Yeah,
Get
no,
outta here.
it's true. Very convoluted. And that convolution slows you down.
Right.
You know, who's responsible? When everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible.
Yep, you knew exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's one of the additional challenges. I will say we never had an attorney general who started her first week. That's not true. Jeff Sessions was very aggressive, but he was gone pretty quickly. And frankly, he was handcuffed pretty quickly. He handcuffed himself. Pam Bondi, not so. She started out, we're seeing FBI agents, DEA agents, federal marshals, IRS agents participating in supporting DHS removal efforts. That never happened in Trump 1.0. DOJ fought us hammer and sickle to not participate, to not help. We never had a Secretary of Defense that the Senate confirmed go to the border, one. Two, own responsibility for it like Pete Hegseth already has. And he went to the border and said, anything this president wants on the border, by God, he's going to get. I can tell you that is the exact opposite of what Mark Esper was saying. That is not what John Mattis said. And that is how you close the border. We're talking border, but you do need to close that border. And it's great that the crossings have dropped 90%. We need them to drop 100%. And that doesn't happen with just Border Patrol. You do need some military on that border forever, not for a month, forever. They have to be part of blocking invaders from coming into this country. And let's face it, that's the original reason people have militaries.
Right, exactly. I mean, precisely. Unfortunately, I think we have to kind of cut this one to a close just because of the radio clock.
We hit a bottleneck.
See, yet another logistical bottleneck. What are you going to do? Ken Cuccinelli, it's really great to have you on. I must say, it's good to let you go, unlike our election night coverage where we had to cut things even shorter. Thank you very much for taking a few minutes with us.
Good to be with you.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
If I could fall into the sky.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, very, very briefly. And this is just for those over on the live stream side of things. Thanks for tuning in to another week of the show. It's been a blast to see things growing on a platform that we hadn't necessarily put a lot of attention towards, and we're really glad to get the feedback that we've been getting slung over, of course, over at TonyKinnett.com, over as well at the Daily Signal. Just to kind of polish things up, I did want to issue a bit of a minor correction here. I'm going to call it minor so that I'm less embarrassed about it. Before we went to the break and the interview with Ken, I said the prison plan, the prison suggestion was from Ecuador, and that's not true. It's El Salvador. So make sure, boys and girls, when you're stating Central and South American countries and you're getting to the E's, keep them in order. That said, I hope you guys have an excellent weekend. We will be back on Tuesday. I'm going to take President's Day and not look at any of you guys at all. Well, of course, I'm going to look at politics because God knows 800 news stories are going to break before we get back on Tuesday. Have a wonderful weekend, a restful time. We'll see you soon. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.